All right, so here are some books that I read and that I'm currently reading. October, November of 2024. First book that I read in October was Post Office by Charles Bukowski. Good book. I hadn't read anything by him in several years, in probably like 5 years. He's an interesting writer to me because he's pretty funny, and I like his observational kind of poetry and humor. It tells the story of Henry Chinaski, who's basically just an avatar for Charles Bukowski, and it's just about his time at the post office. And it talks about the post office, but it talks a lot also about his relationships, mostly his romantic relationships, and his observations of the world, and his drunkenness really is a huge focus as well. Yeah, very flawed guy and character. Chinaski, his alias, I thought. The kind of unbearable mundanity and insanity of American life in the 50s and 60s, for him as a post office worker. Very well encapsulated. But really what shines is sort of the back and forth of his alcoholism and love life in the midst of that framework of this kind of nonsensically rigid, stupid in his eyes, but also hilariously robotic social structure. The back and forth between that is pretty compelling, I thought. I appreciated the way that he showed a lot of emotion, rarely, very rarely looking at it directly as like, oh, I felt sad or anything. It seems like a silly thing to say, in terms of writing style, but he does it in a really particularly dry and poetic, minimalist poetic kind of way. It reminded me of like a comedic Raymond Carver at some points. Thinking of when his girlfriend is breaking up with him, and there's a moment where he says that he laughs, and I remember this because he qualified it as a sad laugh, and that seemed like the closest thing to like a more direct exploration of his feelings that wasn't by means of observing the situation, but even just that qualifier of, oh, it was a sad laugh, showed so many layers of internal conflict and both ego related things and sadness simultaneously in just that one line. And I have to mention the part where he goes through, after a funeral in the book, there's a chapter that is just told in citations that he received. Throughout the book, he gets marked down for when he gets wasted and he doesn't show up for work, or, he does something wrong. He points out the absurdity of these things, but he still gets these reprimands. And there's a particularly emotionally affecting part, just started to illustrate his mental state and how badly he was drinking, or how badly he was missing all this work at the post office. The entire chapter is just a series of citations of his absences at work, and I thought that was powerful. And yeah, it gets really bleak from there. It's actually kind of a depressing ending, but there's still a sense of humor even in the darkest moments, and has a great final page, like last set of lines, which I thought was pretty cool. Very funny read, very short read. Definitely good to recontextualize the rigidity of structures socially by way of his comedy. So yeah, that's Post Office. Another book that I read was Anarcho-Syndicalism, Theory and Practice by Rudolf Rocker. Yeah, this was a pretty informative read. I didn't know a lot of the things that were in this book. All of the information about labor rights and how those came about, how the 8-hour workday came about, and how labor laws sort of became a thing. One thing to note is that it was written in 1946 or 47, if I recall correctly. But yeah, there is an introduction by Noam Chomsky, which kind of connects it. Timeless resource. The part that centers on the series of combinations, as they were called, before unionizing was a thing. The part that focuses on the combinations of textile workers in the 1800s in England was pretty brutal to learn about, but it definitely made me appreciate why some things are the way they are in the world and United States, in terms of labor rights and laws. And I felt it was very inspiring. There were some very interesting perspectives on corruptibility of power and some great socialist theory things that I was not aware about and that I felt were really insightful. It really made me think a lot about philosophically what makes sense to me personally and what doesn't. Yeah, and definitely a great resource for knowledge in terms of labor-related information. Some of the passages, when it talks about the dictatorship of the proletariat and criticisms of the USSR, were harsh without enough that was backing up those claims, other than a matter of base principle, which I can appreciate, but I did feel like there was some information lacking there. Something cool about this book is that it cites all of these different works at the beginning of each chapter. So there is a tangible kind of way to expand on the information that's in the book. So maybe that's just something I have to do. But yeah, it's a very short read, but it is dense with knowledge and information, and definitely insightful for labor-related, workers' unity. And yeah, it seems pretty timeless in many ways in some of the things that it illustrates, even if it's just for how certain things came about. It's useful. Third book that I read was this book. It's got such a great title. Forces in Motion, Anthony Braxton and the Meta-Reality of Creative Music. I loved this book so much, but it was kind of a difficult read to get through. I've had this book for a few years, but I never got through the whole thing because it was too dense, and I couldn't understand a lot of what it was talking about in terms of the musical things, when I initially tried to read it. So I only kind of read the road sections. The book is divided into two sections for the most part. One is called Meta Road, which is tracing Anthony Braxton's philosophies, insights, and life trajectory, career trajectory as a musician, as an extremely brilliant intellectual person and mind. The other part is just Road, which is a cataloging of the 1985 tour of England that Anthony Braxton did with his quartet. And it's just Graham Locke, the author of this book, interviewing the band members, interviewing Braxton, and pointing out little insights of things that he noticed. I really appreciate Graham's descriptiveness of music. I think is beautiful, and you can tell how passionate he is about the music that he's talking about and about Braxton's work. And it kind of like maintains electricity throughout the book. I also just like his ponderings throughout the tour and throughout his interviews. You can tell how intimidated he is of the caliber of musicians that he's interviewing. And as far as Anthony Braxton goes, He's one of the most brilliant artists ever. It's kind of hard to put into words the amount of insight that he has on everything, on literally every subject, and how he relates music to every subject. It's just hard to fathom, and I'll have to reread this book. Even just the methods that he devised as a restructuralist, as he calls himself, they're really fascinating. Even though I don't understand, I can't read the music. I don't understand all the nuances or specifics. Just the structural or the language, the textual thing that he created is just, it really is amazing. Even not knowing or being able to play that music, it's something that can be appreciated if you read this book. It's really fantastic. And Graham Locke does a great job at pointing out certain things that if you're not super into jazz or avant-garde music, you'll still be able to appreciate just from an artistic level of like, wow, this is really innovative and one of a kind. As far as the road section goes, one of my favorite parts was when the drummer, Gary Hemingway, I believe, is talking about trees being dead from acid rain, because they're going through a part of England where there's these square patches of what looks like dead trees, but they're very beautiful. They're just kind of grayish, and Braxton is sort of admiring them, and then Hemingway just goes on this huge rant and says it's because of the acid rain and all this stuff, and everyone else in the car is just in the van is sort of like, are you sure? I don't know, in this confined space when this is happening. But I thought it was striking that Braxton, in that moment, he says, yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't know that. I'll have to look into it. But why are they square patches? Does it just only rain in one square at a time? And then Hemingway is just sort of quiet, and he's like, I don't know. But I know about acid rain and this and this and that. In Meadow Road, I particularly loved the parts where Braxton's talking about music as a vibrational force, and he gets very mystical with what he's talking about. I felt that was the most impactful, and powerful, and moving part of the book, because even though he gets very conceptual and abstract with what he's talking about, he is really relating music to a grounded vibrational power, and he seems hyper aware of how he is yielding that power, and just this construction of language and beyond language, like dimension building that is possible with music, which Braxton so beautifully and brilliantly points out. And he seems like such a kind and humble person through all of this vast brilliance and knowledge. It's very striking how his living conditions were when he was alone and when he was married and had kids, how many sacrifices and risks he took in terms of his livelihood and that of his family, so that he could make the music that he makes and that he made in the 70s especially. It is just astounding how deeply he believed in the music that he was putting out into the world, and how important he felt that it was for him to do so and bring it to life. And it is very inspiring. It is really amazing. The music speaks for itself in many ways. It really does. And its complexities and its tonal shifts and emotional currents, as out there as it can be. But yeah, there is a whole other architecture behind it that is astounding. I'm repeating myself a lot, but it is a really amazing book, especially if you like music, especially if you like jazz, and especially if you like avant-garde art of any kind. Even if you're a visual artist, you'll probably appreciate the visual representations of some sonic melodic things in this book. Like when he talks about gravillic intervals, I'm not 1,000% sure I fully got that part, but it is pretty cool to see the visual illustration of what he's talking about in terms of like saxophone solos, for example. Amazing insights on Cecil Taylor, on Charlie Bird Parker, European avant-garde musicians. Derek Bailey is talked about a little bit. Warren Marsh, which I didn't know about before reading this book. Vast amounts of information and insights on avant-garde and jazz musicians from multiple eras, multiple areas of the world. Great amount of info on Sun Ra as well. The last part of the book, I was not able to understand almost anything of. The actual, like, some of the composition titles, which are, some of them are like little drawings. They're really amazing because it shows Braxton's humor, but also just artistic refinement. It makes me want to learn more and study more so I can be able to see things in the level of clarity that Anthony Braxton does, because it's just fantastic. I hope to one day be able to fully understand his music on a deeper level. It really is very inspiring stuff. Brilliant. He's so freaking amazing. So there were 3 books that I abandoned. So I'll talk about them now. I will be returning to these and finishing them someday. But I just couldn't get through them. They didn't hold me. The first one is a classic that I've wanted to read for a long time, but I just couldn't get through it this time. It was The Odyssey by Homer. Yeah, I know the story is amazing and it's cited very often as a great story, but I just could not get into it this time. The style I just didn't like right off the bat. I guess just because I haven't read anything like that in a long time. All the different family tree, the relationships and previous events that happened before the start of the book, it just was too convoluted. Right off the bat in the first couple of chapters, I was just so tired of that so quickly. Even though there were some images that were very striking, the island where Ulysses is isolated in, there was some descriptiveness there that intrigued me, and I could see, this is probably something very truly epic and amazing, but I just could not get into it this time. I want to honor that read, and so I set it aside for when I'm more compelled by the language and the sense of mythological adventure. Yeah, so the second book that I abandoned was Hegemony or Survival by Noam Chomsky. I love Noam Chomsky. I love the way he writes. I love the way that he talks. Definitely a very important book. A lot of it is talking about American foreign policy and how it evolved, and it centers on the Iraq War and the lies that the American administration so blatantly put out and sold to the world, which propelled them into that horrible invasion. I couldn't get into it. It was too depressing. Even though it is very dire and important, I think maybe something about the political climate in the world made me want to read something that was more inspiring or that relates to the current moment in a different way than that book does. I do want to revisit it. I do want to read it, but it just wasn't the moment this October. The third book was The Unbearable Lightness of Being. This book I really wanted to finish, but I just got so tired of the way that the author interjected and treated the main characters through his commentary of them, which is funny because in a sense it does seem like he knew them and just was telling their story and just having a conversation in that sense, as if he wasn't the writer of the story. But on the other hand, he had a lot of weird ideas of psychology with like Teresa especially that I just felt I just couldn't get into it. The things that he was saying, how they were said, it just felt oddly forced and like it was too on the nose with the emotional and psychological undercurrents of the situations and the characters. There was moments where it just stopped and he talked about philosophy and it didn't feel natural to me. And there's a moment where he talks about Beethoven and it just feels so, it just did not work for me. Even though a lot of the ideas and a lot of the situations were really beautiful and really interesting and really dramatic, I felt. I read half the book, and a lot of the ideas and concepts were cool, I thought, but I just didn't like the way that they were presented. I don't know if it was a translation issue. It's a famous book that a lot of people dearly love, but yeah. It wasn't for me. That one I'm reluctant to finish. One day I'll return to it. Now, November. November reads. We are in November now, and this is what I'm currently reading. So, first one that I read the most. I'm halfway through this book, The Body Artist by Don DeLillo. It's about a woman whose husband passes away, and then some weird stuff starts going on in her house. Very short book. I'll probably finish it tonight, to be honest. My first book that I've ever read by Don DeLillo. I've watched the movie Cosmopolis. I really want to read that book. I own the book White Noise. I really want to read that. I've wanted to for a while. And yeah, it's got a very interesting style. I've never read anything where the atmosphere was so strong, or the tones of each situation was so well presented, as abstract and multi-layered and multi-dimensional as the tone or situation is of each scene. It's all very clear, but simultaneously it feels like a jigsaw puzzle that's being constructed before your eyes. That's my experience of reading it. It just feels like things are clearly stated, clearly shown, and you can get these emotional and poetic sometimes resonances from these descriptions, but it sort of like hangs in the air almost, and then it just clicks into place at the moment that in my experience at least, it seems like clicks into place at the moment that the author wants it to, which I've never read anything like that, and I'm very fascinated by the mysteriousness of the writing. It almost feels like a magic trick. The first chapter, it's so amazing how much is understood of the two characters that are in the scene, and it's all one scene, the whole first chapter. It really boggled my mind. There's this internal amount of time passing that's going on. There's the external time, and then there's the experience of the characters as they go through the events that are happening in the scene. And there's all these interjecting details. It feels very, very multidimensional, but it flows in an amazing way. It reminded me of a weird piece of music where you can really get the emotional subtleties of what's going on, but it's kind of, when you really look at it, it's kind of bizarre the way that it's constructed. I'm halfway through. I'm looking forward to finishing it. Next up is a collection of the best American essays. This was edited by David Foster Wallace. I just started this one, so I don't really have much to say about it, but I'm very much looking forward to it. His choices seem really great. And then the book that I have as a goal for November to finish is a set of Anton Chekhov's plays. I've never read anything by Anton Chekhov, but I do love Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan, and there's that famous excuse that Bob Dylan says that Those songs aren't about him. They're just based on Chekhov's short stories, which is hilarious and probably not true. The emotions of that music, to connect that to this man's work, is very intriguing to me, and I've heard about him over the years. So I'd really like to know what it's all about, and I'm looking forward to diving into that. And yeah, and those are my October-November reads, and the 3 books that I abandoned, and books that I'm going to finish. And I'll see you at the next one.